The land had gone quiet, not the gentle, resting quiet of summer night, but the hollow kind, the kind that creeps into a man's bones and whispers that something he loves is slipping away. Samuel Harlow stood at the edge of his broken corral, boots sinking in soil that had once been black as promise, but now lay the color of ashes. He leaned against a fence post worn smooth by years of wind, his calloused hands gripping wood like a drowning man clutching drift. The wind stirred the prairie grass in long, sad waves. A hawk circled overhead, a dark comma against the endless blue, searching for something that still lived out there. Samuel's eyes followed it, then fell back to his land, the ranch his father had carved out with blood and stubbornness. And now, Samuel was watching it die in silence. The storm last spring had ripped through like a bandit, tearing down fences, flooding gullies, drowning calves. Then came the drought, as if the sky had run out of mercy. What little pasture was left turned brittle under the sun's unkind hands. 2 cattle lay in the far field, ribs sharp as knives beneath their hides. He turned away from them, couldn't bear the sight. What use was pride when ruin sat at your table and drank your last drop of water? He told himself he could hold on just a little longer, patch the fences, keep the herd from wandering too far. But now he knew better. The ranch was bleeding out slow, and all it needed was one good artery tied off. One horse, just one sturdy creature to work the cattle, pull the wagons, drag the logs. He'd lost his last horse to fever weeks ago. Without one, his hands might as well be tied. A horse could mean life, could mean holding on one more season, and a decent one would cost $20. 20. Samuel shoved his hand into his pocket, pulled out the coins he had left. The silver clinked, sharp in the still air. 85 cents. Not even enough for a rope. He let the coins fall back with a hollow chime, then tipped his hat low and started for the barn. His boots crunched on the dry earth, echoing like a prayer no one answered. By noon, the sun was a white-hot iron branding the sky. Samuel hitched his old wagon and drove into town, the road stretching like a ribbon of dust ahead of him. He sat stiff, jaw clenched, hat shadowing his eyes. He hated going into town. Too many looks, too many whispers. There goes Harlow. Used to be his daddy's place, fine spread once. Shame what's become of it. He felt their words before they spoke them, felt them like burrs under his collar. The town of Dawson Creek buzzed faintly in the heat. Children darted between storefronts. Women in sunbonnets traded chatter like cards, and the clang of a blacksmith's hammer rang down the street. Samuel drove past the saloon, past the mercantile, and pulled up to the livery. Horses shifted in their stalls, tails flicking at flies, eyes bright and proud. They smelled of sweat and earth and strength, everything he needed, everything slipping out of reach. The liveryman, Burke, came out wiping his hands on a rag. Big man, red-faced, voice like gravel in a tin pail. "Samuel," he drawled, "ain't seen you in a while. What brings you in? Don't tell me you come to sell the ranch." Samuel climbed down slow, dust rising around his boots. "Need a horse," he said, plain and low. Burke barked a laugh. "Don't we all? You looking to buy or dream?" Samuel's jaw tightened. "What's your cheapest?" Burke hooked his thumbs in his suspenders, eyed him up and down like a butcher sizing up a thin steer. "Cheapest I got worth feed in runs you $20. Samuel let the number hang between them, heavy as an iron weight. 20, Burke said again, like he was spitting tobacco. "You got it or not?" Samuel reached into his pocket, felt the sad rattle of coins, and knew the shame before it even burned his face. "I can make payments," he murmured. "Work off the rest. You know I'm good for it." Burke's laugh rolled out like thunder over dry hills. "Payments? On a horse? Samuel, you're lucky I don't charge you to stand here begging." The words stung, but Samuel just stood there, hands curling into fists, eyes fixed on the dust by his boots. That's when he heard it. A voice, soft, trembling like a candle in the wind. "Please take me instead." The sound sliced through the heat like cool water. Samuel turned, slow, as if afraid he'd imagined it. She stood in the shadow of the livery wall, half hidden. A girl, or no, not a girl. A woman grown, though her dress hung loose like it once fit a softer body. Her hair was the color of wheat left too long in the sun, braided but fraying at the ends. She clutched a small bundle to her chest, maybe all she owned. Her eyes met his. Gray, not like storm clouds, but like the ash after, a color that had known fire and now held only smoke. "Take me," she said again, voice barely more than breath. "I can work, cook, mend, tend stock. I ain't worth much, but more than the coins in your hand." Bert guffawed behind him. "Lord Almighty, what is this now? You hawking yourself like a mule, girl." She flinched but didn't look away. Not from Samuel. Something in her gaze held him still. Not pleading, though yes, there was that, but something steadier beneath it. Resolve. A last card played with shaking fingers. Samuel felt the heat press tighter against his skin. Felt Burke's laughter scraping the air like rusted nails. He should walk away. Tell her no. Tell her he didn't need another mouth to feed when he barely had beans for himself. But her voice, low, raw, stripped of pride, echoed through him like the hollow sound of wind in an empty barn. "Please take me instead." He didn't answer. Couldn't. The words jammed in his throat like dry thistle. He just stared at her, and in that stretched-out second, the town sounds fell away. Only the creak of the sign, swinging overhead, the restless stomp of a horse in its stall, and the quiet weight of two souls standing on the same cliff edge, looking down at ruin. Burke snorted and spat in the dust. "Suit yourself, Harlow. You want charity? Best head to church. I ain't got time for fools." Samuel barely heard him. The woman's fingers tightened on her bundle. She stepped closer, just enough for him to see the fine tremor in her hands, the threadbare edge of her sleeves. Her chin lifted, shaky, yes, but there was iron under it. "Please," she whispered, "don't make me beg twice." The sun leaned west, casting long shadows across the street. Samuel felt one of them wrap around him, cold despite the heat. What kind of man would he be if he turned her away? And what kind if he took her? Either way, the earth under his boots had just shifted. He tipped his hat low, voice rough as gravel ground in his throat. "Come on, then." Her shoulders sagged. Relief or defeat, he couldn't tell. She climbed onto the wagon without another word, clutching her bundle like a shield. Samuel climbed up beside her, flicked the reins, and the wagon rolled on. Dust rose behind them, swallowing the livery, the laughter, the old life they'd both just walked out of. The road stretched out like a ribbon of dust, twisting toward a horizon that shimmered under the weight of the sun. Samuel kept his eyes on it, hands steady on the reins. The wagon groaned with every rut in the dirt, each creak echoing like an old man's sigh. Beside him sat the woman, the stranger who had spoken words no decent soul should ever have to speak. "Please take me instead." Her voice lingered in his ears, even now as the miles slid by slow and silent. She hadn't spoken since they left town, just sat there with her bundle clutched to her lap, back straight, face turned to the wind as if to keep it from brushing against his. He stole a glance once or twice when the wheels hit softer ground, saw the way her braid frayed, threads of pale gold lifting in the breeze like a worn ribbon. Saw the shadow of hollows beneath her cheekbones, the quiet tightness of her mouth. She wasn't pretty, not in the way posters showed, with painted lips and eyes that promised too much. But there was something about her, something that didn't wilt, even after whatever storm had tossed her into this. Samuel shifted, the leather seat creaking under his weight. He cleared his throat, words dragging slow from a place, and used a sharing. "What's your name?" She didn't look at him, only let her fingers tighten on that bundle before answering. "Clara." The sound was soft, like a bell struck far away. "Clara." He nodded once, more to the wind than to her. "Samuel." Silence settled back between them like an old quilt, thin in places, heavy in others. By the time they reached the ranch, the sky was blushing with evening. Long strokes of crimson bled into the horizon, and the prairie wind had cooled to a whisper. Samuel guided the wagon past the sagging fence, past the barn leaning like an old drunk against the twilight. The house stood small and stubborn, boards gray with years, windows smudged with dust. Clara's eyes flicked to it and then away, as if memorizing its weary bones. He pulled the team to a stop. For a moment, neither moved. Then she climbed down without waiting for his hand, skirts brushing the dirt like faded shadows. Samuel unloaded what little he'd bought in town. Some nails, a sack of meal, salt. Clara stood quiet until he shouldered the sack toward the porch. Then she spoke, voice barely above the hush of the wind. "Where do you want me?" The question sank deep, stirred something uneasy. Samuel shifted the weight of the sack, glanced at her. Her eyes were steady now, not pleading, not soft, just waiting. "You can take the spare room," he said gruffly. "Upstairs. Ain't much, but it'll do," she murmured. Then, after a pause, "Thank you." The house breathed the smell of dust and old wood, but it was warmer than the night outside. Clara stepped into the little room under the eaves, set her bundle on the narrow bed. She lingered by the window, fingers resting on the sill. The view spilled out in endless plains, grass bending like prayer under the twilight wind. She closed her eyes for a moment and let the quiet soak into her bones. It wasn't safety, she knew better than to believe in that, but it was something gentler than what she'd left behind. Downstairs, Samuel built a fire that popped and whispered in the hearth. He set beans to boil, cut bacon into small pieces, too small, but it was what he had. He heard her light steps on the stairs and looked up as she came in. Without a word, Clara moved to the table, rolled up her sleeves, and began slicing the hard bread he'd left out. Her hands were deft, though the knuckles bore faint scars, pale as old lightning. "You don't have to," Samuel said, voice low. She glanced at him just once, gray eyes calm as still water. "I do. Nothing more. No explanation." But he understood. Work was her way of standing upright in a world that had tried to break her spine. They ate in near silence, save for the crackle of the fire and the soft scrape of spoons. Now and then, Samuel's gaze lifted, met hers across the table, and slid away like shy sunlight through clouds. He found himself wondering things he had no right to wonder. How had she come to this, offering herself like a sack of grain to a man near broke? What had life taken from her that she had so little left to bargain with? But he didn't ask. Not yet. Questions felt too sharp for the quiet they sat in. When the bowls were empty, Clara rose, gathered the dishes without being told. Samuel watched the curve of her shoulders, the firm set of her jaw. A woman who had learned early that no one was coming to save her. And still, here she was. The days began to stack like worn cards. Clara rose before the sun, stoked the fire, set coffee boiling in the dented pot. She moved through the house with a kind of quiet grace, mending what was torn, scrubbing what was dulled by years of dust. In the afternoons, she walked the fences with Samuel, skirts brushing the dry grass, hands steady on the wire as they stretched and tied. He offered to teach her to handle the old mule, thinking she'd balk at the harness and sweat. But Clara only smiled, a small, wry thing, and swung up on its bony back as if born to it. She rode with the wind, teasing her braid, face lifted like someone who'd forgotten how to breathe and just learn again. Samuel felt something stir in him then. Not desire, not yet, but a kind of respect that rooted deep, silent as seeds under snow. The neighbors noticed. Folks in town, too. One afternoon, Martha Ellison rode by with a basket of eggs, her gray hair tucked neat under a bonnet. She sat in the saddle like a queen despite the creak of her bones, eyes sharp as sewing needles. "Heard you got company," she said, voice soft but lined with meaning. Samuel wiped sweat from his brow, leaned on the post he was setting. "She's helping out. Ain't nothing more." Martha's smile was thin as thread. "World don't see it that way. Two souls under one roof, tongues a-wag faster than prairie fire." Samuel said nothing, just set the post straighter, hammer biting, with like teeth. But that night, as he watched Clara sewing by the lamplight, the warning hummed in his head like bees in a jar. It came to a head one morning at Dawson Creek. Samuel needed nails, wire, few tools. Clara rode along, insisting on helping load. The store was crowded, men in sweat-stained hats, women with baskets, a hum of talk that turned sharp when Clara stepped in. Samuel felt it, the sideways looks, the half-hidden smirks. Burke was there, of course, booming laughter rolling like distant thunder. "Well now," he crowed. "Look at Harlow. Couldn't buy a horse, but he sure bought himself company." The laughter that followed scraped Samuel raw. Before he could speak, Clara set down the coil of wire in her arms, turned to Burke with a gaze cold as creek stone. "You hush your mouth," she said, clear enough to cut the room in half. "A man trying to keep his land don't need your spit to water it." The silence after was thick as molasses. Burke's face went red. Someone coughed into his hand. Clara turned back, lifted the wire, and walked out with her head high, skirts whispering like tall grass in wind. Samuel followed, something burning hot in his chest. Not shame, not anger, something fiercer, something like pride. That night, he couldn't stop seeing her. Chin lifted, eyes steady, fire sparking where smoke had been. She wasn't just surviving. She was standing. And somehow, without him knowing when it began, she was holding part of him up too. The summer bled into autumn like ink spilling slow over paper. One morning, Samuel stepped onto the porch and tasted the sharp bite of the coming cold. The sky was brushed with gray, clouds hanging low like tired eyelids. He pulled his coat tighter, felt the leather stiff and cracked against his shoulders, and listened to the wind combing through the brittle grass. Behind him, the door creaked soft. Clara came out carrying a pail, her breath puffing white. Her sleeves were rolled, hands bare to the chill, braids swinging against her back like a golden rope. She nodded at him, wordless as always at first light, and went to the pump. Samuel watched her move, quick and sure-footed, like someone born to hard ground. There was no complaint in her, no faltering. He'd seen women with softer lives who broke under less, but Clara, she bent and never snapped. She worked the pump, the squeak of iron slicing through the stillness, and when water spilled silver into the pail, she smiled faint and secret, as if even this, clear water on a cold morning, was a small grace she could pocket. Samuel felt something warm rise in his chest, something he didn't have a name for yet. By mid-morning, they were in the south pasture, patching the line where a post had rotted clean through. Clara held the wire tight, while Samuel drove nails, the hammer striking in slow, steady rhythm. A hawk screamed overhead, lonely as a prayer. "You ever think about leaving?" Samuel asked, words grating out before he could swallow them. Clara didn't glance up. "And go where?" He shrugged, eyes on the nail biting into wood. "Town, maybe. Someplace easier than this." The wind tugged a strand of hair loose from her braid, laid it soft against her cheek. She blew it away with a slow breath, still gripping the wire. "Easier don't always mean better," she said. "Sometimes it just means emptier." Samuel paused, hammer hanging midair. Her voice was quiet, but it slid under his skin, left him raw and wondering. He wanted to ask what emptiness she'd known, what it had cost her to speak like that. But the word stuck, and he drove the nail home instead. Nights grew longer. The lamps burned late, as Clara mended shirts gone thin at the elbows, humming under her breath. Samuel sat by the hearth, boots off, the warmth licking his sore feet like a faithful dog. Sometimes he caught her looking at the fire with that faraway gaze, the kind folks get when they're walking through old rooms in their mind. Once, when the silence stretched too tight, he asked soft, "Was there someone? Before all this?" Her needle stilled mid-stitch. For a breath, the only sound was the pop of sap in the logs. "Yes," she said at last. The word hung like frost between them. Samuel didn't push, though questions pawed at the edges of his thoughts. She bent her head, the lamplight painting her hair with liquid gold, and went back to her sewing. That was all she gave him, all he could take. The first snow came sudden, a white veil flung over the prairie in the dark hours. Samuel woke to a world hushed and shining. Fences softened under the weight, the barn roof sagging like an old man's hat. They worked side by side through the cold, driving the cattle into shelter, breaking ice on the water troughs. Clara's cheeks burned rose, her breath curling like smoke as she hauled pails, her skirt hem stiff with frost. Samuel told her to rest. Once, twice, but she only laughed, a low, warm sound that curled into his bones and stayed there like fire in winter. That laugh. He hadn't known how starved he was for it, for the shape of joy in a world gone lean. The days kept stacking like quiet bricks, and with each one Samuel felt the walls inside him shift. He caught himself waiting for her voice in the mornings, soft as the first sip of coffee, waiting for the brush of her hand when they passed tools back and forth. And once, God help him, he dreamed of her, not in the way of hunger, but in the way of shelter. Dreamed of her standing in the doorway, lamplight pooling at her feet, eyes steady, saying nothing and saying everything. He woke with his throat tight, shame prickling his skin. What right did he have? She hadn't come for that. She'd come because she had nowhere else to stand, and he'd given her ground. That was all. It was near Christmas when the past came riding back. Samuel was in town, trading eggs and a cured ham for nails and salt, when he heard the voice behind him, smooth as creek water, sharp as a fishhook. Well, I'll be damned. Clara rose. Samuel turned. A man stood by the mercantile door, hat tipped back, grin wide enough to split his face. Fine coat, boots polished like pride, and eyes fixed not on Samuel, but on Clara, who just stepped down from the wagon with a coil of rope in her arms. Her breath hitched. Samuel felt it more than heard it. Didn't figure I'd see you out here, the man drawled, sauntering closer. Thought you'd gone back east after you changed your mind about our understanding. Clara's jaw tightened, color rising in her cheeks like a storm under pale skin. I didn't change my mind, Wade. I saw yours clear enough. Wade's grin soured. Now, darling, you know that ain't true. You just weren't ready. I gave you time. His gaze flicked to Samuel then, slow and measuring. Didn't think you'd spend it shacked up with a broke rancher. The words landed like spit on the ground. Samuel's hand curled into a fist before he knew it, but Clara moved first. She stepped close, so close Wade had to tip his head down, and her voice cut sharp through the winter air. You lost the right to speak my name, she said, steady as steel. You lost it when you made me a promise and then broke it for a prettier face with a heavier purse. So you can turn that fancy horse of yours around and ride back to whatever woman's keeping your bed warm now. The street had gone quiet. Samuel could feel every eye on them, could hear the blood roaring in his ears. Wade's grin cracked, but only for a breath. He touched his hat, slow and mocking. Suit yourself. Don't come running when this one leaves you too. Then he was gone, boots crunching hard on the snow, spurs chiming like bitter laughter. Clara stood stiff, breath hitching white in the cold. Samuel wanted to speak, to put something between her and that look on her face, but the words felt clumsy, too small. So he did the only thing he knew. He took the rope from her arms and said quiet, Let's get home. She looked up then, and what he saw in her eyes near brought him to his knees. Not shame, not anger, just weariness so deep it could drown a soul, and under it, a flicker of something else. Something like fear of hoping again. They rode back through the snow in silence, the world washed clean and bright, though nothing between them felt clean anymore. Samuel gripped the reins tight, fighting the urge to reach across the wagon seat, to take her hand and promise her that he'd never let her fall like that again, that he'd stand between her and every Wade in the world. Promises were heavy things. He'd seen what happened when men broke them. But that night, as the fire burned low and Clara sat, sewing in the lamplight, Samuel made one to himself. Quiet, wordless, sealed in the hollow of his chest. He would not let her carry that weight alone. The sky broke without warning. One moment, it was just gray, heavy with the promise of snow. The next, it was a beast tearing itself open, flinging wind and ice across the prairie like claws. Samuel heard the barn doors bang wide, cattle bawling in panic. He was already pulling on his coat when Clara came down the stairs, skirts tucked, braid loose from sleep. Her eyes met his and needed no words. He shoved the door open. The storm rushed in, cold slicing sharp as knives. Snow whirled in wild, angry spirals, thick enough to blind a man 2 steps ahead. The herd, he shouted over the roar. They'll scatter. Clara nodded once, jaw set, and followed him out into the white. The corral was chaos. Shadows of cattle lunged and shoved against each other, their cries drowned by the storm. The wind ripped through the fences, toppled posts like matchsticks. Samuel fought to drive them back, cracking his whip, his voice raw. The cold stung his face, clawed at his lungs. He saw Clara on the other side of the corral, arms wide, skirts whipping like torn sails, forcing the panicked beast back with nothing but sheer will. She looked so small against them, but she didn't yield. She stood her ground like a tree against the gale. Samuel's chest clenched tight. He wanted to tell her to run inside, to save herself, but she was already saving him. A steer broke from the line, crashing through the splintered fence, charging into the white. Samuel lunged after it, boots sliding, snow clawing at his legs. He caught the tail end of its shadow, rope burning in his hands as he fought to turn it. Then a cry. He whipped his head around. Clara had slipped, the storm dragging her down into the drift. A fence post had fallen, pinning her skirts, snow piling fast around her legs. Samuel's heart hammered wild. He dropped the rope and stumbled toward her, every step a battle against the storm. Clara! She was struggling, hands clawing at the snow, face pale against the dark churn of the storm. He threw himself down beside her, ripped the post away, seized her arm. Her fingers were icy, trembling. "I got you," he rasped, pulling her free. She gasped, eyes wide, hair whipped across her face. For a heartbeat, their foreheads touched, breath mingling in the storm. Then Samuel hauled her up, arm tight around her waist, and together they staggered back toward the barn. The night blurred into endless labor. They fought to close the gates, to drive the cattle in, to nail boards with half-numb hands. Their bodies moved like machines wound too tight, every muscle burning, lungs raw with cold. And still, Claire did not stop. When Samuel faltered, she lifted. When he nearly collapsed, she was there, steady, fierce, eyes burning brighter than the storm itself. By dawn, the world was still. Snow lay deep and unbroken across the prairie, a white shroud covering the scars of the night. The herd huddled in the barn, alive, steam rising from their backs like prayers. Samuel leaned against the wall, chest heaving, his whole body shaking with exhaustion. Clara sank beside him, her skirts heavy with ice, her hands raw and red. They sat there, shoulder to shoulder, breath curling into the frosty air. Silence settled, deep and heavy, broken only by the soft lowing of the cattle. Samuel turned his head, studied her profile in the pale dawn light. Strands of hair clung damp to her cheeks. Her eyes were closed, lashes trembling. She looked so breakable in that moment, so utterly human, and yet she had stood against the storm like something more than flesh. The words rose before he could stop them, words he had carried like stones in his chest. "I thought I needed a horse." Clara's eyes opened, slow, puzzled. He swallowed, voice rough. "I thought if I could buy one, just one good horse, I could save this place. That it'd be enough." He shook his head, a broken laugh catching in his throat. "But it wasn't a horse I needed. It was you." Her lips parted, breath catching like a thread snagged on a nail. Samuel pressed on, voice shaking with the truth of it. "You held this place together when I couldn't. You held me together. You're worth more than every acre, every dollar, every damned horse in this world." His hand trembled as it lifted, brushing the wet strands from her face. "Clara, you're the reason this ranch still stands. You're the reason I still stand." The silence that followed was sharp, fragile. Snowflakes drifted in through a crack in the roof, melting on the straw. Then Clara leaned in, slow as dawn, and laid her forehead against his. Her breath trembled against his lips. "I never wanted to be saved," she whispered. "I only wanted to belong somewhere. You gave me that." Her hand found his, cold fingers twining with his rough ones, and for the first time, Samuel didn't pull back. He closed his hand over hers, tight, unyielding. And there, in the battered barn, with snow piled high outside and cattle shifting softly in the straw, two souls who had come to each other out of desperation found something far richer. Not survival, not bargain, belonging. The storm had passed, but something new had taken its place. a quiet promise, unspoken, sealed in the way their hands fit together, in the steady way their breaths found the same rhythm. Outside, the prairie glistened beneath the rising sun, wide and wild and waiting. And inside, Samuel and Clara sat side by side, hearts no longer strangers, ready to face it all. Not alone, not anymore. Samuel thought a $20 horse would save his ranch. Instead, he found Clara, worth more than all the horses, more than all the silver, more than every acre of land. Sometimes, the thing we believe we need is not what saves us. Sometimes, salvation comes in the shape of another soul who simply chooses to stay. And now, dear friend by the fire, if this tale stirred something in your chest, let me know in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from out there in the wide, wild world. And if you'd like to hear more Wild West tales whispered slow and true, don't forget to like and subscribe. Until the next story rides in, may your road be steady, and may you always find someone who chooses to stay.